giving that's possible to have.
Yeah.
That sounds great. And like, where do you personally, and here's a much bigger question to bridge into the book and the topic, but where does Jeremy Lent fit into the web of meaning? Like, where do you as a human at this point in your journey fit into it all?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking such a meaningful question, Ben. And basically, at this, the whole research and writing of that book, and then the kind of expression, just kind of talking about the book afterwards. But it's as if I mean, for people who know the book, you'll know what I'm saying. There's conceptual intelligence and animate intelligence, and the conceptual intelligence is the kind of intelligence that writes a book, puts it all together and communicates. And it's as if that conceptual intelligence led the way for my entire integrated being. So as I sort of went into the book, as I really wrote it and lived in it, it's actually transformed me. And I've noticed, like oftentimes now, when every time when I begin my day, I begin the day with just a few minutes of a meditation with like sort of affirmations, almost like mantra kind of stuff. And it begins really with what I'm doing with my life, which is like, just like this, it goes with reverence for the glory of the universe, with gratitude for this little eddy of consciousness. I worship the divinity of all life. I devote my existence to the flourishing of life. And that's basically, at this point, this person, Jeremy Lent, is totally like, I've dived in. And this is what I'm giving myself to, is like, what can I do really for the greatest benefit of all life? Where can I take my skills? And each of us have different skills. And so this, and not saying, oh, I'm doing it in the right way. I'm doing it in what way means the most to me, but really giving myself whatever the years are ahead to the benefit of all life, this thing that we are not just part of, but we are, and that's
we are, with a big full stop. That's what you remind us of in a myriad of ways through your work. And I was thinking about what you just said. When I was talking to my daughter, she said, "Who are you chatting with tonight?" And I was trying to explain who you were with it all. And I said, well, did you know that the cells in your body that make you up now as an 8-year-old aren't going to be the ones that make you up as a 30-year-old or 50-year-old? And so what is it that is you as an essence of a person? And even a child can, like, that's a great question to ponder.
Yeah.
And it links so beautifully to what you've just said in terms of, oh, we're all part of it. But what I love about the work, and what I think what's super helpful for so many of us, is grounding it in all this different science and wisdom, and joining the dots, the web. And my question, actually, one of our members that was asking was, how did you go about building this? And you've just talked about, shared your kind of instinct for the journey that you've been on and how it's changed you. But how do you go about building this web of meaning and all these different concepts and bring them together? Because you couldn't include every bit of wisdom that's ever been. So how did you put this all together?
Yeah, well, the way it began, and I think I sort of mentioned that just in passing in the book when I talk a little bit about myself, but I went through this whole sort of kind of meltdown in my life, sort of in the middle of my life. I'd built a successful company, taken it public, all that stuff. And my wife at the time, who passed away some years back, she got seriously sick. I left the company to look after her. And then she went through years of kind of borderline dementia. So even that we'd been so close, and then I kind of lost her even while I was looking after her. I lost the company I'd built, basically lost pretty much everyone I'd known. And I went through this whole deep investigation, like whatever I do with the rest of my life, I want to be really meaningful, but I don't want to take somebody else's word for it. How can I do that? So I went through my own investigation, where I wrote an earlier book called The Patterning Instinct, A Cultural History of Humanity's Search for Meaning, where I looked at all the different concepts we're told to believe in, whether it's God or human uniqueness or just basically anything, or the difference between humans and nature, and looked at what they actually meant from. Where did these things come from? And actually the research I did was pretty much up to 10 years of research. As I was actually, a lot of it was after I was looking after my wife who passed away. And as I was doing this, I sort of began to realize, God, I wish people had written answers for me. Like I had to sort of felt I had to piece things together in my own way. And there was a certain point at which I went, this could be really valuable for others if I kind of share this. I started making these notes, this massive Word document, like I think something like 2,000 pages to it, but I had it organized in a way I could find stuff really quick. And that was actually both the books, The Patterning Instinct and The Web of Meaning. I thought originally it was going to be one book, like here's where our culture went kind of skewy, here's how we can reintegrate it. And I realized it was way too big for one book. So it became basically one book and then another one. And so it was really more as I was finding little tags, almost like doing a jigsaw puzzle, and like this piece fits here, that piece fits there, and then put a little tag like, oh, remember to come back to that one. And it was, so that's what I kind of built over years. And really the book was really just trying to communicate it in the best, most skillful way I could, where meaning had arisen in my life, the way I made sense of meaning.
That's a really helpful explanation of the journey that you've been on. The cultural mess we're going through, and like how to navigate out of it, the web navigation as opposed to a kind of a straight line navigation. And of course, you open, talking of Thanksgiving, you open with the Uncle Bob story, which we can all relate to, especially in a community like this of curious minds who are very conscious about the big challenges in the world, a privileged community are trying to have a positive impact with their work and lives. So we're going into the festive season. We've had Thanksgiving. We're going into Christmas and other festivals. We're going to sit down at some point with Uncle Bob. Mm-hmm. What's your sense now of like how we, as people who are trying to help guide or people to a different place, take on maybe it's not the right word, but deal with Uncle Bob, whether it's migration or climate or Brexit or Trump or whatever the topic for the day is.
I know this is such a huge topic, and there's different ways you can look at it, because one way is, we can try to sort of win an argument. And each of us have probably been in this place too many times, right? Uncle Bob starts talking about those bloody migrants, or those, or climate is all a big, they really overstate all this crap, and we've got and we start to sort of get into it and we might sort of feel good about a part of ourselves in the short term, like I'm standing up for what I know is right. And of course, what does it end up? Basically nowhere. Like, we get hot on the collar. Uncle Bob starts responding back. Other people might take sides. Everyone, somebody might start joking about it, and then it's all over, and that's it.
Yeah, and we feel anger is just your anger is like just below the
anger is like still. So that's one approach that we know doesn't work. On the other hand, there's this wonderful notion that George Monbiot has written about. He wrote he actually gave a talk about this year or two ago, where he critiques this notion of obedience. This is the other extreme. Like you can go like, okay, it's my family. I know I'm not going to change the way Uncle Bob's thinking about this or that. And so, they say these kind of horrible things. Somebody goes, oh yeah, I just flew to South Africa for a 3-day weekend. It was so much fun. And God, the price of the flights to Singapore are so cheap now. And you go like, oh, the climate emissions, but you don't say anything because they're having fun and you don't want to disrupt. And so George critiques this notion of obedience, like by just letting it go, we're complicit in it. So that's the other extreme. So how do we get past this thing? So what I believe is probably the most skillful thing we can do is to actually end up leaving Uncle Bob curious a little bit, like actually try to connect with Uncle Bob to their heart rather than their head. Don't try to beat them in the argument, but actually try to, like a real crafty or kind of maybe a bit more skillful approach might be to look at how can I actually talk to Uncle Bob about, like he's talking about those bloody migrants or whatever, and then talk about somebody who maybe you and Uncle Bob know who did immigrate. Say, oh, you mean like so and so? Remember they and sort of connect with their heart. And Uncle Bob begins to realize, oh yeah, that was somebody I really liked. But rather than say, Uncle Bob, you're bad, is get him to be curious and ask a question that doesn't feel like a question that is actually attacking him, but a question that causes him to just be a little curious, to open up his thinking in a different way. Like, oh, I wonder what so-and-so's family is feeling when they get stopped. And I wonder where they are at Christmas time right now. And just leave it at that. So then what you're really trying to do is open pathways in the minds of people whose minds might be more closed right now to begin to feel their own exploration. Because everyone's got to make their own path to make these discoveries. They're not going to get there by getting beaten on the head. In fact, the opposite will happen. So anyway, that's my approach. And so it's kind of a way where you're not being obedient, like George Monbiot says. You're not just avoiding the thing. You're trying to engage, but in a skillful way, where you can also still have fun. You're not disrupting the dinner party, but you're kind of opening the pathways towards something that's more connected.
Yes, and not necessarily showing the answer, but opening the pathways. I love that. And yes, so we'll try and put that into practice then. And this brings it to the bigger theme of the book, which is that, you know, the integration of science. And we read a lot of great science and technology books here at Rebel Book Club. We looked at gene editing this year with CRISPR. We've just done we've just read a book about AI, which is now out of date. So we'll play Web of Meaning bingo tomorrow night when we meet up, and I'm sure people will be using ChatGPT to check in on the glossary of your book because they haven't finished it, and they'll be like, "Well, I learned this way." So the integration of science and knowledge, which feels is a really exciting moment in our evolution, with traditional wisdom, which is it as simple as it's like trying to get the head and heart to connect better, or how do you see that relationship?
Yeah, well, in a way, it is as simple as that. I mean, it's what you might sort of think of as simple but profound, because it is really about getting the head and heart to to integrate better. I like to use that word integrate because there's that sense that you can become one while being different too. But you're really becoming one of what I call like getting to an integrative intelligence. And that is an intelligence that really leads from this realization that we are actually integrated creatures, that we do connect with all of life on Earth, and that animate intelligence we have connects us with all of life, but also not hating ourselves as human beings. There's this way in which sometimes people who see what's going wrong with the world and they go deeper and they realize there's something about human beings that have caused so much damage. And then you can get into this sort of human self-hatred. Well, maybe it'll all be for the best if humans do become extinct, and then the rest of life will thrive or whatever. But what I find, what's so exciting as a possibility is to look at this possibility that we as humans actually can bring something very special to the earth. We can bring this different kinds of intelligences, and we can even use AI to connect with actual other animals. People are using AI to really try to delve deeply into the patterns of whale language, or even use AI to understand how maybe plants use all their different intelligences. So there's ways in which we can use that intelligence to ultimately, in my view, sort of become sort of stewards of life on Earth. Recognize that humans, we do have a special role, but that role is not to conquer nature. That role is not to basically believe in human supremacy and just look at all life as being there as a resource for what is best for us as humans. But once we realize that, as you know, in this great quote from Albert Schweitzer that I quote in the book, that I am life that wills to live in the midst of life that wills to live. Once we kind of realize that and go into that, then we can say, what can we do that actually allows humans and the rest of Earth to sort of move into this idea of like the Symbiocene, this great idea. Like an eco-philosopher from Australia called Glenn Albrecht was the one who coined it. Imagine the Symbiocene, like this long-term era where we can actually learn as human beings how to tend the rest of life on Earth, how to really become one with it. What a wonderful vision. And it is in some ways very simple, but it's so different from the way that almost everybody thinks now about technology or mainstream ideas exist, that would involve a fundamental transformation. Start to ask the question, not like with a new technology, oh, how can I become the next billionaire? Or how can I make something really cool that will get lots of people excited? But what about, how can I use this technology to be in the best interest of all life?
I love that framing. It's simple and very profound. And that quote that you just reminded us of, "I am life, the will to live," is almost like the yin to the yang of, the film that we've just seen about the nuclear bomb. Oppenheimer with I am death, destroyer of worlds, and we always have these options, right? And this is the moment to lean into the I am life side. So you're in Silicon Valley. Well, not quite, but you're in the heart of this amazing creativity that shaped so much of the modern world for good and bad. Are you there because you feel like that's where you can have real influence? And are you seeing a shift happen at this moment of kind of the birth of AI from that part of the world?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I'm here really just more by happenstance, because this is where I ended up when I, before starting that internet company that I took public, that I talked about a little bit earlier. And then, but I have ended up here, and I like staying here partly, not so much because of the technology, but because there's a lot of people in this part of the world who are exploring different possibilities, not just on the tech side, but in places around consciousness and places around really expanding our sense of really what it means to be a human being. So there is a very rich sense of incredibly exploratory communities around here, which I find great. But the question about AI and technology, well, interestingly enough, just a couple of weeks ago, some of you may have heard of something called Singularity University, which was originally a global university put out by Ray Kurzweil, who was one of the greatest proponents of the singularity. He wrote a book called The Singularity is Near. And I fundamentally disagree with him. He's very much of a tech will solve the entire universe
utopian,
kind of problem, right? But what's interesting is the university's created Singularity University. They bring lots of tech executives together. They have these like 5-7 day deep in-depth retreats. And the last couple of years, they've actually asked me to offer an introductory keynote on exactly this question: how can technology be in the service of life? So there's a very hopeful way in which people embedded right in the heart of technology, they recognize, a lot of them are not the sort of Elon Musk, narcissistic, conquer the world, I've got all the answers, assholes, basically. But there's a lot of people who really care and actually recognize how much power has just by happenstance happened in this area and in their lives, and want to do it for good. But a lot of them are still stuck in this reductionist paradigm. And so there's a little bit of there's one force, a very powerful force that drives the reductionist paradigm, with people believing tech has the answer. And it's a much smaller, incipient force of people like me and others going around saying, actually, we need to look at a real paradigm shift. But there is some of that in there. And I feel that that's maybe one of those sort of conflicts, if you will, that might affect the future of humanity, because this stuff that's happening is so powerful.
It's so powerful, and yes, there's so many examples of this happening right now, and that being the bridge or the pathway, as you said earlier, from this is kind of Uncle Bob at scale, right? You're talking about here, right. So the indigenous wisdom and traditional knowledge, which people are more and more understanding, especially through the climate movement and so on, how not just like it's a morally correct thing to do to help protect the rights of these peoples, but actually the wisdom of these peoples, because of their relationship with land and nature is so much closer than the rest of us, is vital to our future survival. So how do we, those of us who are in this modern world of tech and work, access that and learn from it and use it, bring it in? How do you do that in your, or see it being used?
Great question, Bob, Ben. And in a way, I actually had mixed feelings when I heard that there was this kind of vote around my book, and I beat out braiding sweetgrass and sand talk. And I was obviously very happy that people really liked the Web of Meaning. But honestly, those books, one of the first things I'd suggest to people, if they haven't read either or both of those books, go and read them, because these are two indigenous, brilliant thinkers who really translate for the rest of us in the world real indigenous wisdom in a way that I could never come close to, because I don't actually, I haven't been raised within that way of thinking. I'm sort of coming from a more dominant mainstream way of thinking. So that's one way, is to read books like that and become aware of different ways of looking at things. There's somewhat of a difference too around if you live in a country such as I do, which is the result of settler colonialism, where there are indigenous people alive and well and maintaining their culture, who have survived through 500 years of devastating conquest and genocide and racism. And in cases like that, there's a big drive, and it's hugely important to actually reach out to those groups of people. How can we give them platforms? How can we actually fund work that they're doing? And not so much coming from the point of view of we have the answers and we want to help these people to get their voice, but really give them the honor and the central stage to have more amplitude in what they can show us. And for those people, who live in places that were conquered so many millennia ago that it's difficult to reconnect so much with indigenous wisdom, there are still, of course, Wiccan and other traditions to deeply connect with that have not been lost. And there is a way in which I believe we can connect more globally with the core understandings of what these traditions mean all around the world. Really be open to hearing people from different perspectives, hearing people from different cultures, and not labeling them. And also, just as importantly, not putting them on a pedestal, saying, well, this person's indigenous, they must be right, they must be more honorable. But recognizing we're all human beings together, we're all flawed, we've all got our blind spots, but being eternally curious, I think, saying, what can I learn from this? Where are my blind spots? Where can I actually act in basically an indigenous way, which is summarized by one indigenous scholar as these kind of 4 R's of indigeneity, things around like relationship, things around like reciprocity, things around responsibility. How can we actually act in ways that really make those meaningful, that really realize them? That's the best way in which we can bring indigenous wisdom into our daily living.
Oh, I love that. Act in an indigenous way through your learning. That's a great thought. It reminds me, I was lucky to live in the South Pacific for a few years right now in the islands, and you go to church with the local community, like classic colonial influence. You go to a Protestant church and everyone would read the prayers and sing the hymns. And then you go back to the island, mix this sort of narcotic drink, and you'd offer it up to the ancestors and the sea snake, and do this whole animate, spiritual ceremony. And both existed side by side, right? The dualism of that kind of existence, which it's so fascinating. So one more question from me, and then if you can stay for a few more minutes, Jeremy, I'm sure our members would like to join in as well. So if you've got a question, just in a moment, just jump on. So if we've got COP28 starting tomorrow in Dubai, and it's obviously already a mess because the oil state has been put in charge of the climate crisis. But to that, if you were president of COP tomorrow, Jeremy, how would you use your knowledge to try and shift the leadership of the world in the right direction?
Great question. Yeah. Well, an interesting thing about the COP process is they have these kind of circles. They have like an inner circle of, all the executives, oil executives, and all the billionaires flying around, and a few politicians, and the ones who are basically destroying the world and pretending that actually they're working together to figure out how not to be doing that. Well, let's sort of go. You have a second circle of groups that are oftentimes very responsible and trying to make things happen, but in a more official way. And then you have this kind of outer circle, almost like like if you think of the Edinburgh Festival, like the fringe, right, or the outer fringe,
the fun bit.
And there's a lot of indigenous people, and a lot of actual people who are doing demonstrations, people who more like Greta Thunberg and others who are on that outer fringe, who aren't even allowed close to the inner circles because they might be too disruptive. But there's actually, I know personally, people who are leading groups bringing indigenous leaders actually to COP to make themselves heard. So if I were president of the proceeding right now, I'd turn the whole thing around. I'd bring all those people from the outer fringe, I'd invite them into central stage and give them a global platform, let all the media actually there are these interviews that get done that end up on YouTube, and maybe a few hundred people, or maybe, and most perhaps a few thousand people might watch this YouTube video. Those are the ones that should be actually on prime time news. And all of these kind of hypocritical world destroyers who are the ones pretending to actually care about the climate are the ones who should be marginalized. And basically the whole power structure needs to be turned around.
That would be a radical presidency, and it'd be bringing the microphone to the drumming circle for the world. That would be amazing. And thank you, Jeremy. If anyone's here who's listening along to all of this, wants to jump in and ask a quick question, this is your moment. You can unmute yourself in the video and come say hi. Drop it in there. Let's do it now. It's mid-morning in California, so I'm sure Jeremy's to-do list is piling up as he spends his time with us this morning. And as a way for people to join. So we're a community of time poor because of the way we're living our modern lives, not us, but the way society is, but hyper curious minds, and even struggling to consume great books like yours, even though we've got intense interest in the topic. Do you have a reflection on, how you manage, I mean, again, in California, you must see this all the time, how we are to manage this better? Because it feels like the balance isn't there. For those of us that really want to go deeper, learn, connect with these indigenous voices, and read more of the kind of work that you're doing, meditate more, and yet life feels like, we've got to be constantly connected through our technology and through our work. How do we manage it all? Because we're burning out, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, I do think one of the most important things to do is to really connect with the animate intelligence within yourself. And I mean, to me personally, what I found the most powerful forms to connect with that have been like just developing a sitting meditation practice, and maybe starting off just for a few minutes. When I first discovered meditation, it was in the middle of that meltdown I told you about, in the middle of my life. I had no idea. I thought it was some sort of weird thing that you transported to some spiritual realm or whatever. And I just found this book that said, just sit with your back to a tree just for 5 minutes and observe what happens. And it was like this transformative, like, oh my God, I've never done that before. You can begin really slowly and just begin to increase. And I do think that's one of the best ways to connect with that quieter intelligence within you. To me, embodied movements, I personally am a great fan of Qigong, and Tai Chi is equally wonderful, or just things like dance, but really connecting with energies within your own body and doing it not as seeing it as something separate, but doing it mindfully, trying to sort of integrate it within when I'm dancing or when I'm doing anything where other embodied energies arise. How does that fit in with everything else that I am? And honoring them all. And then kind of learning that you can become this integrated consciousness. So those are the things I think are really great. There's one wonderful Tibetan teacher who uses this wonderful phrase, short moments, many times. That sometimes you're in the middle of something, you're waiting for a bus or you're waiting for somebody, and you've got like these maybe 15 seconds, maybe a minute. And obviously, now we've been programmed to pick up our smartphone and check what's on Instagram, or what did somebody respond, how many likes do I have, whatever. but to actually move away from that and say, okay, let me take this moment to breathe and to calm and to just notice what's there within me. And if you do Qigong like I do, just sometimes just breathing and opening out your body and feeling. But those often can be the most wonderful ways to remember moment by moment that you are this integrated consciousness, this integrating being, which can allow a lot of wisdom to come out in all the other parts of our lives.
I love that. And it's not, they feel like radical acts, don't they, in our current world. Ricky, if you want to join quickly, now is your moment. Otherwise, we're gonna thank Jeremy and let him get back to integrating everything into his Monday. Natalie's grateful for introducing us to the slime mold. So there's a you know, a book report that you need to put on the Amazon page. Jeremy, thank you so much for obviously your time this morning, but much more so your work over the years with the patterning instinct, the web of meaning, and all the communication you've done around it, and your leadership and teaching. It's just we're so grateful to have discovered you and your work. And thank you for your time today.
Well, sure. It's been great talking with you, Ben. Thanks. Thanks to you all, and enjoy the conversation.
All right, take care. We're going to go and join little groups now, but we'll hope to meet one day in person, Jeremy, around a circle or at a dance. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Cheerio. All right, so there we go. I hope your minds are full up, like bellies after a good meal. And so what we're going to do now is jump into little groups and have a chance to reflect on what you've just heard, whether you've read the book or not. It doesn't really matter whether you're new to the conversation tonight. It doesn't matter. These are just big, interesting questions to explore and ponder. And maybe, like Jeremy just said, spending a few seconds just to feel what it's like to let go of all the noise and just think about these ideas in a slightly deeper way. So let's see where that takes us. So we'll have 15-20 minutes in little groups together, and then we'll come back and share any rounding up thoughts. All right, off we go.